All right. Hi. This is the panel on observations on Chinese conrunning. My name is Helen Montgomery. I am your moderator. I will have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we will get started. So, Bill, you want to start?
I'm Bill Lawhorn, DC area convention runner.
You're not in the mic.
Oh, I'm not? Okay. That's better? Okay. Bill Lawhorn, DC area convention, including DISCON 3, co-chairing with Colette Fazard, who's in the audience. And I was fortunate enough to be invited to Chengdu just a couple weeks ago to observe the Galaxy Awards and the related convention. And I have many thoughts. So.
Hi, my name is Tong, and I can go by Tony. And I'm a Chinese Canadian working in Chengdu, and previously I've been in the film industry, but now I'm helping the Chinese science fiction literature world to bridge them with the film industry. So I'm more like in between. You can call me a producer, but my company now is 8 Light Minutes. It's a publishing company run by 20 science fiction fans. So we do Doctor Who books, we do Galaxy's Edge magazine, collaborated with Michael Resnick, and science fiction novels.
And as I said, I'm Helen Montgomery. I am a Chicago fan who currently lives in Seattle. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Chicago in 2022 World Convid, and I was also invited to the conference in Chengdu that happened a week and a half ago.
Hi everyone, my name is Yilun fan, and as my family name indicates, I'm a fan. So I'm originally from the area near Shanghai, China, and then I moved to Hong Kong and America. For the last 10 years, I've lived in these both places and basically studied. 2 years ago, I was doing my science fiction studies PhD program at UC Riverside. And after 2 years, I decided that I need to suspend and really put my knowledge into something really practical. So I went to Chengdu and worked for the science fiction industry. I'm also a colleague with Tony. We both work for 8 Minutes. My major job is organizing the Chinese edition of Galaxy's Edge. I've attended quite a few conventions in America, like LostCon, Gaslight Gathering, Convolution, and the last year's WorldCon. So I'm here to share my experience. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vincent Docherty. I've been involved in WorldCon for a long time. I co-chaired a couple of them. In the context of this panel, I was invited, had the honor to go to the convention at the beginning of November in Beijing, the China Science Fiction Convention. And I'm here to share some of those experiences.
Yep. I'm Ben Yallow. Theoretically a New York area fan, but sort of from almost every place. As with some of the others, I was invited to be at the Chengdu convention. So I, again, got a lot of impressions and ideas. I am also noting for the record that as fan guest of honor for the WorldCon where it is being administered, I am not taking sides on the 2023 race, but my way of staying neutral is I'm helping everybody who asks.
All right, thank you. I'd like to start, before we get into our observations on Chinese conrunning, I'd like to have our 2 guests from China talk a little bit about Chinese fandom and what it's like over there, what types of conventions they have, and some of the structures that they have in place for running the conventions. I don't know who of you wants to start.
So I'm from the younger generation, so I will introduce what we do as fandom. So most of our fandom across the whole country, I think more than 50 of them are college students, are very young, and they run science fiction club within the universities. So what we do is very similar to all the fandoms around the world. We do book sharing session, we do screening, and we invite writers, science fiction filmmakers to schools to have certain panels, and in the whole national scale, we have every year we have 3 to 4 national scale conventions, like the one in Chengdu. It's called Chengdu International Science Fiction Conference. This is the 5th one. The first one was in 1991. So 1991, 1997, 2007, 2017, 19. It was the national convention held in Chengdu. Then we also have the bigger convention called China Science Fiction Convention. This year was the 4th one, and it was in Beijing. All of our commissions are fan-run, fan-based. You may notice that there are some government funding and cooperation fundings. Yes, they are providing money to us, but the fans are the one who's really organizing it and who's really attending it. Do you want to add something, Tony?
Oh yes, I want to maybe talk about how did the Chinese fandom started. I think it's pretty, it's pretty recent. I mean, for the past 30 years, that's the history. I mean, modern Chinese science fiction, especially fandom, began to grow with the China opening up, reform economically, and all the current generation of the science fiction writers, they all were like fans. I mean, grow from fans, and now they became like famous writers like Liu Cixin, the Three-Body Problem. Yeah, he still claimed himself he's the biggest fan, and so this fandom grew with the magazine Science Fiction World that's also based in Chengdu. This magazine, at the peak of the distribution, is 400,000 copies. So it could claim that's the biggest science fiction magazine. Even now, they are still like, no, it's 400,000 before, but now they still have 50,000 like average distribution. So this magazine really made Chengdu like the center, the capital of Chinese science fiction. But now, because it's growing and growing, bigger and bigger, so the magazine staff began to they create and set up their own company to attract more fans to work together for the fans. They can like move faster to tailor their like product services to the fans' different interests. So that really there's a booming scene now in Chengdu. It's one city. There are many different like small companies, startup companies are running. My company 8 Minutes. I just introduced more focus on publishing. There's other one more focusing on making like peripheral, like fan
products.
The fan products. So yeah, they're really growing really fast. Like this year, for the like huge success of the blockbuster film Wandering Earth. So this company, they're all young students. I mean, from young students from the college science fiction association. They started a crowdfunding. They only asked for 100,000, but they got 7 million just within 24 hours, just to produce some of the film. I mean, from some of the props, the toys from the film. So yeah, that could show like the enthusiasm in China, like all over. So they only at first they only wanted like 20,000. They're not quite sure how much they could get, but it's like within 24 hours they got 7 million. So yeah, so it shows the fandom, the enthusiastics. Thank you.
You had mentioned and I'm sure that it's a different model than a lot of US and European and Australasian conventions, but that the corporations and government provide a lot of funding. Can you talk about that, how that usually plays out with the running of the conventions? Like how, sometimes money comes with strings attached. you know, and the fans kind of have to do what the person giving the money wants. I don't know how much of that happens.
So yeah, for the government, since you know, science fiction is regarded as a good thing that you can promote science, can do something that popular science cannot do. They can teach children about the scientific knowledge, and also inspires the young generation to love knowledge. So they think it's good to invest money to science fiction industry. So that's why government is giving us money to have this kind of convention. And for cooperations for these companies, running science fiction convention is a good promotion for them, like Huawei this time. They also devoted the money to the Chengdu International Conference, and they had a small booth selling their cell phones, just very small ones, because they want more exposure to the general public. And they think all these fandoms, there are a lot of students who have scientific background training, and they think it's a good chance. Maybe they can attract these students to be their potential employees in the future. So that's why these high-tech companies are investing money to the conventions. But for the really organizing and the running level, they do not intervene so much. So basically, we can organize any panels we want. The content we provide like 8 or 9 minutes this time. We are the co-organizer of Beijing Science Fiction Convention held in Beijing last month, and we were responsible for the panels related to film subject. So all our cyber-related organizations, institutes, we provide the content to the conventions, and the government and the company, they do not interfere so much about the real content of the convention. They just want more promotion for themselves.
Sorry, maybe I can provide some extra background. I think for China, as Helen mentioned, government funding. I think the Chinese government, first, they see science fiction as a way to promote science education, because in China it's huge an agricultural background history. The government has a huge task to combat like superstition, like kind of like non-scientific thinking. So they see popular like science fiction as a way to promote science, scientific thinking and science education. So that's why they put resources there to promote. And also, I think, you guessed when you were in China, you heard the term science fiction industry or science fiction sector. Mm-hmm. You never heard of that in North America, because, yeah, so they see science fiction as pivotal or as some bed for, I mean, it can influence a lot, because it relates to scientific innovation. It relates to like peripheral products, to like fan products, and also the publishing, I mean, literature publishing industry. They see film, video, like TV, as a way to promote science fiction and to feed, I mean, to nurture the literature, because literature only for itself, it seems hard to survive on itself. They need like more going to video game, film adaptation. Then the revenue could come back to nurture, to fund more literature. So that's why there is a so-called science fiction industry there. So they see science fiction as a springboard for a whole very different kind of industry to combine, to connect them together to produce more, I mean, more products and more technological innovation. Yeah, that's the background behind all this.
With that, then, Vince, since the Beijing conference was first in November, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience at that one?
Sure. So I'll qualify that by saying that myself and a number of the other invitees were actually treated as guests. So in the model that most of you would be familiar with, you know, we had a liaison one-to-one, which was really useful because they acted both as a guest helper as well as a translator. So in that sense, it was a very privileged experience as a guest. And I'm not saying that's bad. On the contrary, it was really good. I wish all conventions were like that. But
I was going to say it was the same for those many of
Okay.
us in Chengdu. It was the same. We were treated as guests.
And the experience of the event, I would say it felt like a mixture of a formal conference with a lighter science fictional edge. It was in a convention center in a former fair or garden fair site, which is very pretty, but outside the center. The program, to the extent that I could follow, it was a mix. There were formal discussions and panels, which to my eye looked like the discussions of science or of the industry. And of course, with the recent, the huge upsurge in interest outside of China of particularly the works of Cixin Liu and The Wandering Earth. There was a small dealer's room, for instance, which would be very recognizable, selling, the usual things, particularly related to, the films, or what were obviously fan clubs of various different subgenres. That was very recognizable. It wasn't big, but I walked around and I was having the same conversation as I would in a dealer's room here. The people who were attending, some of them were dressed a bit more formally, like in a conference, and some were quite recognizable, particularly of parents bringing their kids who were dressed up as this or that character. The interesting thing, and Regina, Can Yu, who had been a big helper for us here, and she explained it to us, because this was a kind of like a mix between a formal conference and a convention. Of course, you had to do the right thing for the people who were paying the bills. So the opening ceremony was on the last day in the formal room, and it was a very formal setup. I'll show you a picture in a minute. The hall was amazing because it had a big domed ceiling that looked exactly like the weapon in the Death Star. I'll show you a picture in a minute. It was very exciting, actually. And there was a huge transformer in the lobby of the hotel, which is even more exciting, because that's the first thing I saw when I got in from the airport. But there were a number of official people who had to have their, they had to be visible. They had to, I think the chief person gave a speech. They did have auto-translate, which actually wasn't bad. There was the occasional laugh, but, and I'll come to that. And then there was one moment.
And with the auto-translate, are you talking like a closed captioning or the ones that you heard in your ear?
It was only closed captioning.
Okay.
Simultaneous. I can actually show you a picture of what it looks like as well. And then it was mostly very familiar, but a bit more formal than I would be used to, except for the opening ceremony, which just clearly is was very theatrical. And the invited guest, the invited senior officials sat at the front. The most senior person gave a speech. They all went up on stage. They pressed the button to officially open, and then they left. And that was fine. It was. I mean, it's just it is what it is. Other than that, the experience was great fun. Those of us who were invited from outside China. We had a number of items. We were all asked to give a TED talk, which was actually went really well. You were the moderator, of course. You not wearing the pandas, but it went really well. And we did have the simultaneous translation, which actually, I think there was the occasional thing that didn't quite work, but certainly the feedback most of us sensed was it was well received. But you'll have to tell, what feedback there was. But apart from that, it was a very enjoyable experience, and very much appreciate the opportunity to see it.
Okay. Bill?
I'm sure you only want me to able to be in the opening ceremonies, and I got to press the button because I wore my suit and my fancy tuxedo vest, which were well received. So at midnight, the night before, so Thursday night at midnight, I got a phone call from Sarah Chan that said, and yes, it woke me up, that said, hey, can you be in opening ceremonies? We like your suit. So dress for success. So the difference that we had in Chengdu was we had the simultaneous translation where you heard that they were translating in 4 different languages. And so it's back and forth. So the Chinese guests could understand and hear what the English speaking, Japanese, and was it Korean. So that was a different experience, and it was very good. During the opening ceremonies that evening, we found out how great, or during the Galaxy Awards that evening, we found how great the simultaneous translation was during opening ceremonies, because it didn't happen during the awards. So we were sitting there very confused at times as to what's going on.
I'm so glad I went back to the hotel to go to bed.
But the thing was that they had the opening ceremonies, they had the same activity where you had the officials come out, they gave their speeches, and then they had the official opening. But it was very well done. They know how to run it. The fans at the convention were open. They were very happy. One of the things that I observed is there is a rife opportunity between the current Worldcon culture and the Chinese culture. One of the things as you have interaction with people and you have significant interactions, there's a gift giving culture. And I think the easy way for that to mesh in Worldcon culture is ribbons. People love to give ribbons. And if they were to win and you went ahead and said, hey, there's a giving culture and people like ribbons, we could have a nice mesh of the culture without having it too expensive for anybody. But then there could be some really significant ribbon lengths. The kids would just eat it up.
Yeah.
So I think we'll stop at that point.
Yeah. Well, we also noticed we had a small booth in the dealers area, and much like what Vince said, it was very recognizably the dealers area, right? And we shopped and we were given pandas and we were, all kinds of stuff. But we had like a little Worldcon booth. So New Zealand and DC and Chicago, we were all hanging out in there and could talk to people. And Kelly had brought a bunch of stickers for people to decorate their badges. And, just like here, right? People are putting stuff on their badges and the little kids loved it. And, they were coming over, and there was a fair amount of cosplay, actually, that I saw there, which was kind of cool. Yeah, I mean, the fandom was so clearly recognizable as us. That was one of my other takeaway as somebody who's run events now twice at Worldcon was I'm really jealous of their opening ceremonies. They had like lasers and stuff, and it was so cool. Ben?
They're clearly us. There's no question. You could sit there at the Future Worldcon booth and watch everybody come by excited about this idea of having a Worldcon, because the Worldcon has all these science fiction writers coming there, and oh boy, it's exactly us. Opening ceremonies was spectacular. It showed 2 things. Number 1, you need talent. Number 2, you need money. Basically, this was a convention of roughly 3,000 people that had a budget comparable, probably in fact larger than a Worldcon budget. And note that admission was free. They had sponsorship. There's no question. But it is clearly us. Yes, the ceremony, the 3-hour award ceremony was particularly difficult if you did not speak Chinese. There were some singing and dancing and things like that acts, which of course transcend culture. They were science fiction themed singing and dancing, but you could appreciate that even if you didn't necessarily understand the words. But you know, when they were announcing the awards, none of us who are English only speakers had the foggiest idea what awards they were giving out. But the people who were getting them were clearly thrilled to be getting them. So it is clear that that kind of fanish enthusiasm is very much a part of their culture. It is different because of finances. It is different because fundamentally Chinese culture and Western culture are still different cultures with different histories, and it will take time for the two to learn the best parts of what the other can bring. But it is very clear that the enthusiasm for science fiction as a literature, as a multimedia, etc., is very much there. They also run young. Basically, you're looking at a convention where the average age seems to be about late 20s, early 30s, something like that, which we have very few 3,000 person conventions that track that young. Much of the discussion, when they saw that we were outsiders, most of the people coming up to our booth switched pretty immediately over to English. Some of the older people were not as fluent in English, but particularly, as I say, it tracked young, and the young people there, for the most part, were speaking English.
Kelly?
But we had the simultaneous translation was great. It was, I suspect, expensive because you can't work your translators real hard, and so you need a lot of translators, and you need a lot of little earpieces.
That's about $2,000 for a single person, a single translator.
Right.
Because I did it once.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So I
they,
know the price.
and they had
For
4 or 5
languages.
translators sitting in booths. So you're looking at a lot of money, but it made it for the things that were being simultaneously translated. Unlike what happened at the Japanese Worldcon, where they, as with most Worldcons, they could not afford simultaneous translation. This made it close to seamless.
Kelly, Kelly was also at the Chengdu conference. You had a comment?
There's a microphone over there.
Sorry, we don't have a microphone runner.
It's okay. I just wanted to well, sorry, my name's Kelly Bueller. I'm a co-chair of Con Zealand. Let me get the right height. One of the things that struck me most was how the fanish enthusiasm for the genre, for the event, for being at a convention and doing the stuff didn't come across very well at the other World Cons where I've seen the Chinese fans present. I think, you know, you're thinking about people who are communicating in a second language, who aren't feeling confident, who aren't in a group of friends they already know well. And some of the things you can read as being standoffish is actually just being a bit uncomfortable. Seeing these fans in their place with their people, it was so much more clear to me, just the enthusiasm and the usness.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. So I know all of us who were invited there, we all, Vince, you mentioned that you were invited to give a TED style talk. And the rest of us in Chengdu, we were all on various panels. Vince, can you briefly tell us?
I got to give a talk too.
Yeah, we were involved in a number of things. We were all interviewed, and it was a very professional interview, I have to say, with a translator. It was really good. There were a couple of other items we were invited to, including the kind of the official dinner, which was also great fun. And then there was the TED Talks, which we did on the I can't remember if it was the Saturday or the Sunday. We were all involved with, and as I've just been reminded, the compare was actually with us, of course. And it was great. I mean, I've actually found a picture which the people in the room can see with the simultaneous translation on screen behind in both English and I assume Mandarin.
That's it's human combined with machine
Both,
translation.
okay.
Yeah, both
Okay.
together.
Okay.
So it's very fast.
Okay, and it was, and we got, certainly I felt that we got a very good reception. People seemed interested, and so it was quite okay, a little bit more formal perhaps than the Chengdu event sounds like, but certainly it all went seamlessly. It went on time. As I said, the main hall is again showing people in the room. It really did feel like being in front of the Death Star laser. But,
Wow.
but yeah, and I just looking at the photographs, I for the opening ceremony itself, I was wrong. There was actually audio translation as well, because I'm just seeing someone with the thing in their ear. But that was only, as I recall, for the opening ceremony. But again, maybe it was more common in Chengdu.
And Bill, you also gave a solo presentation in Chengdu.
Yes, I did.
He's never going to let us hear the end of this.
Hey, it's all good.
You want to talk about what you talked about?
No. I mean, it was they wanted to know more about Worldcon and the bidding process and what went through and how we got there. And I talked about that, which is to anybody in this room, exactly all the stuff I was going through with a little bit of history mixed in.
Right.
So, I mean, it was a very generic presentation, which new to them, old hat to everybody in this room.
Right. And then following that, there was a panel. It was you, Dave McCarty, Ben, and
Regina was the
Regina moderated, and was it Norman?
Yes.
Norman as well. Norman Cates from New Zealand. And what was the topic of that panel?
That was another talk about Worldcon and just general perceptions and thoughts and what things work, what things don't work, and what things are we seeing.
Okay. And then I know I was on a panel that was also about bidding and attempting to explain the concept of voting to people and how bidding and voting works, which was interesting and definitely a new concept for most of the people in the audience. And then Ben, you were on, what else were you on? Those were the ones as well. Yeah. Okay.
The thing that was very clear is that because the Worldcon is fundamentally financed by membership money, as opposed to being financed by corporate sponsorship or government money, that there will end up needing to, should Chengdu win either for 23 or if it loses in 23, one would hope they would rebid later and quite possibly win. So should there be a future convention there, it is clear that there needs to be some way of accommodating the differences between the financial model that Worldcons are based on and the financial model that those conventions are based on. But this is an implementation detail. It will have to be done, and it is clear that that is one of the biggest cultural divides.
Vince, was there how much focus in Beijing, if any, was there on the Chengdu bid?
There was a presence, absolutely. Although the event, the Beijing event was sponsored by the Chinese Association of Science and Technology, so it was very much focused on that. But the various representatives of Chengdu were definitely there. They were on various parts. I think you had someone in the dealers area as well, if I recall. So given the different kind of setup of that event, they were visible. Yes, absolutely. And there was social stuff as well. I mean, I remember going to breakfast with Can Yu, and she just introduced me to the person she was sitting with, which was Liu Cixin. Just doing what you do, you just everybody having breakfast together. So the informality was there as well.
Okay. There was also a lot of interest from at
Media.
least in media and journalism. And I know, Bill, you participated in a group interview.
Dave McCarty, myself, and Kelly Bueller on a Friday had an interview, and we're in a kind of a little room that was about half the size of this room. It was probably even smaller. It was more like a quarter the size of this room. And there were 30 people from press that were packed in that room to ask questions and to learn about Worldcon and our thoughts on it. The enthusiasm from the journalists was freakishly scary in some respect. It was like, oh my God, it's like they're treating us like rock stars and it was, there were write-ups in the news magazines, etc. And it was very impressive to see the amount of enthusiasm that we're seeing from media, because, we can have maybe Neil Gaiman and George R.R. Martin can draw that kind of attention. But I mean, it was Dave, myself, and Kelly that were getting that. Laugh, it's true.
Okay, let me explain a little bit of that. I think Worldcon began to be noticed by Chinese fans and also by the Chinese general public, not until Liu Cixin won the Hugo Award. So that gave it a huge boost. And I will go back a little bit about the Chinese sci-fi convention running thing. You're hearing different convention, and in the past month, I have attended 4 Chinese sci-fi convention, and this is the 5th one. So before the Beijing one, we have another one in Chongqing. That's Webinar Award. That's a 10th anniversary. Thing is totally funded by fans, fans membership money, but also they got major corporate sponsorship this year, and one of the major science fiction writers, Han Song, who is also a journalist from the Xinhua News Agency, he had a widely accepted or very famous slogan about Chinese sci-fi convention. He said, Chinese science fiction fans should get together often and dance around the bonfire and drink beer all night.
So that's the reason we get a sponsorship from a beer factory.
So we get alcohol sponsorship. Yeah, and there was 3 major science fiction conventions in China. They run by different entities. So the Beijing one, it runs operation the entities are top, Chinese Science and Technology Association.
This is the most official one we call
most official one.
Yeah.
And this one, because it's in Beijing, it's heavily controlled. You saw riot police stationed around. Mm-hmm. You get a security check twice. Get in, get out. So, and that's off the center of the city. It's not in the Beijing city center because the Chinese government in Beijing, they're very nervous about huge crowd gathering, and they're worried about security issues. So that's why it's at that place. It's not in the center of the city.
And in fairness, that was only really around the opening ceremony when there. I didn't see much extra security on the other days, for instance.
But they had some major Nobel Prize scientists talk, but that's in the center of the city. It's high profile. They have 3 Nobel Prize winners, and together with Robert Sawyer, figures like that. They have talked about future vision, humanity, those kind of big topic. So they will not award totally like by fans, organizations, and also the top government like sponsored, but also still run by us, by fans and also fan-based companies. And there is the Chengdu one, they have a Galaxy Award. That one has been the only thing from the science fiction world magazine. It's their magazine's award.
Like a Asimov award,
Yeah,
things like that.
it's a magazine's award.
Like Locus award, yeah.
But because this magazine, Science Fiction World, is not independent like corporation, it's ministered by the Sichuan Science and Technology Association. So that's like the one level lower than the Beijing one. So the magazine thing, the top like central government thing, and also the fan-based thing. And also there is yet another new one in Beijing run by the Future Affairs Administration. That's a fan-based company. They call themselves Future Affairs Administration. So they try to run the WorldCon in Beijing for several years. So from the past years, they were pretty active around the world like sci-fi convention scene, but because it's quite difficult to get this thing in Beijing, it's virtually impossible to get approved, like to gather a word like Beijing. That's the opportunity for Chengdu, because Chengdu, the city government, they see the opportunity, they have the resources, and then the city government is building a new like city branding as a science fiction capital of China. They run a study, an index, like the city index of science fiction index. Like Chengdu was
ranks number
Chengdu
one.
ranks number one.
Shanghai ranks number two. Beijing number three.
Yeah, on the top of all of Chinese 10 cities. So the enthusiasm is from top and from bottom. So from the fans
together.
also from it's together. They just combine together. That's why it has a huge fire there.
So we have talked about a lot of the positives, and I know I would say overall my experience was very positive. But for the two of you, would you say, looking at particularly Chengdu was there was a fairly significant presence of English speakers and other languages and stuff, and what would you say are maybe some of the things that you guys learned or you feel like you're going to improve?
Yeah, still, I think translation needs to be improved. Like the 3 hours Galaxy ceremony night, there's barely translated there. Also for the schedule, the agenda, we didn't send out the English version ahead. So it was not until all the foreigner attendees arrived there, they got the handbook. So before that, they didn't know when was their panels are. So I think for the future, we will prepare that really ahead, so everyone gets the information before.
I think they didn't. They were not prepared for like people like Bill to wear such glory. Yes, it was after they saw him they decided to. That's why they didn't prepare for the translation, I guess.
Well, I'm just thinking that oh, your program went out late. None of us have ever experienced that before.
I think that's what I'm trying to talk about. I think overall the organizational skills, it's lack the organizational skills. I mean, the overall speaking, I mean, maybe there's like Chinese kind of characteristics. I think that's why we are here, like to learn, to observe, to learn from like how for the past 80 years, like WorldCon, how they're running. Like this morning, I was surprised like how they could I mean, even the internal communication could be a panel, like so. But after the panel, I really realized like it's really helpful. There's so many issues, so many details you need to attend to. I think those things are what we need to learn, and also what we need to bring back to the Chengdu building community to learn from, to have a comprehensive like training for all the from the staff and to the volunteers, they all need the training. But like for this Chengdu thing, they never. For the volunteers, even like when we ask them questions, they don't know. I don't know. So we are disoriented. We couldn't find where the place is, and we ask volunteers. I don't know.
Yeah, the Chengdu conference was run by Science Fiction World magazine, so we too didn't take part in the organizing the part. We just
and we didn't get our program like schedule
yeah.
1 week, like just like.
But for bidding for the WorldCon in 2023, we will all the organizations in Chengdu related to science fiction, we will unite together. So we needed to structured.
Yes, yes, yeah. We will have a more formal like committee instead of like I think as
Yes,
one of foreign guests complained about the Chinese bidding. That you never know who is like in charge,
yeah.
who is in charge of this bidding committee.
Yeah.
So that will be changed.
Yeah, we will in the future very soon form the committee and the division head, and also we'll have a volunteer training program that's really necessary for us.
Oh, and there's a question up on from Esther.
So Esther says, we are very supportive of you as a bid, Chengdu. It's really good to see you at SmopCon, but we have a lot of worries about you as a bid. How will you make more fans take part in the bid? So lots of people actually taking part in the bidding process. So I think, and Esther, correct me if I'm mistaken here, she's talking about getting more people involved at like being at conventions and having tables at conventions around the world to promote the bid. Esther, is that what you're asking?
So I think it was before SmopCon, all the bidding work was done by Science Fiction World. And right now, they somehow realized that it was not enough for just Science Fiction World to be the bidding, to hold everything. So right now they are called for all the institutions, organizations from Chengdu to work together on it. That's why we too are here. We are from 89 Minutes. And we are also thinking of uniting all the fans across China. They can take a lot of the volunteer work in the future. So I think this will really be a joint efforts of fandoms, sci-fi related publishing institutes, organizations to work together on the bidding. But the first thing, yeah, we think we should form the bidding committee very soon.
And Ben, we're close to the end. So actually, before we do that, are there questions from the audience that you want to ask, either us as observers from when we went over, or from these folks about actually being a Chinese fan? Any questions? Jack.
Yes, Jack Hennigan. I was just within the science fiction community in China at the conventions. It sounds like you have a corporate group that sort of manages or runs things. How well do the volunteers work, or organizationally from the top down? Are they volunteers all the way, or do you have the corporate people like your magazine company managing at the top and then the volunteers doing work below?
For the bidding process, I think yes, it is. But for actually organizing the convention, we will recruit the volunteer to like assign them to set different positions. Someone do the translation, some maybe do the technology, and some have very skilled in maybe like art exhibition things that they will do everything they are good at. So, but for this bidding process are mainly by the professionals, and some vendors are like Regina and like Stanley Chen. I think they too are very likely to be the bidding committee because they are very knowledgeable about the international fandom. They know how to deal with international fandom, how to communicate works. Yeah.
For the past conventions, for different conventions, they have different similar. Basically, they have a core like organizing committee to do the planning, but for all the detailed work, they distribute it to different fan-based companies like us. So because promoting science fiction culture is beneficial to the company, so that's why it's a corporate thing, but at the same time it's a fan-based thing. So and then every different institutions, they have their own like connections with volunteer groups. That's how like we get them together. So it's like a web.
One of the big things that seem to be very confusing, both us and them, is that effectively the Spanish anarchic model of how you organize things does not really match well with the Chinese cultural model of which is more rigidly structured and much more hierarchical. You know, a Worldcon is theoretically hierarchical, except for the fact that there are funny dashed lines running all over our org charts. This is confusing. It will merging the way the international volunteers, because of course any Worldcon is going to require international volunteers who understand the Worldcon culture. More hierarchical team, which is the way Chinese fandom is used to working, is going to be a challenge, and it will take time, and neither model alone will work for a Chinese Worldcon. It will have to be a synthesis of the two models. That also means that each side will have to spend a bunch of time working with the other side so that you begin to feel in your fingertips what the other model is like. Because we know in our fingertips what our model is like. They know in their fingertips what their model is like. And the Worldcon will not work if either model in its purest form is being used.
We're close to out of time. Bill, do you have any final thoughts regarding 2023 Chengdu?
Yes.
Are you going to share them?
Sure.
Okay. Good
So,
talk.
We'll end there. So one little thing we hadn't talked about yet, and I would assume it's one of the perceived negatives, security issues. It was brought up briefly. If you go to Washington, D.C. in the museums, it's a similar level. They have, they'll take your bag and run it through a X-ray machine. They will wand you to see if you go off. And it might have just been that because we had guest badges. Yeah, enjoy that. It might have been because we had guest badges, we didn't go through quite as much screening, but it didn't seem like they were going through a significant screening. Easier than getting into work for me. So I'm working at a federal agency with a bunch of security theater in DC. I went through less security going through the Chinese airports than I do going to work. So just on a little note for people to know that. I think the big thing to note from my experience is there's a ton of enthusiasm for Worldcon, for science fiction, and they are fans and they roll out their rock stars just like we do. Lu Chichin was everywhere. Is there an opportunity to three-body problem, and then wandering Earth, and we do the same thing. You highlight your big people, and yeah, you know, they were there and they were amongst fans. They were willing to talk, and you could see at the opening ceremony as people were running up to Rob Sawyer and they were running up to Lou, they were like, "Can I get your autograph? Can I get your autograph?" And so like, fans are fans, and they were fans.
Vince, any final thoughts from you on the state?
Well,
of
very, very briefly, I think, it's always better to engage than not. And, any sincere attempt at engagement should be treated generously and welcomingly. So, that's my sense overall of how things are going. And then just one very tactical thing, which is your deadline for submitting your bid is now 14 months away. Not to panic anyone, of course.
One thing,
really quick, because we're
Yeah,
slightly over.
one thing that I was particularly noticing is, for those of you not aware, I come from New York. I'm used to big cities, 24-hour cities, things like that. Chengdu is twice the size of New York City, 17 million people.
There's all the food, y'all. All the food.
Also, worth mentioning that Chengdu has the largest LGBTQ community in China, so it's a really inclusive, very tolerant city. So I think it's really
pretty
bonus to
laid back, slow paced city.
Yeah.
Famous for like very slow.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's a very diverse.
It's in Sichuan.
For those of us who were in Chengdu and still have photos, say, on their phone from the trip, can you raise your hands? Okay. So Kelly, myself, Bill, we still all have a lot of photos from our trip on our phones. If you want to see them, and Vince, you obviously have yours from Beijing, just find us at some point and we'll be more than happy to show you stuff.
Or if you're on Facebook, a lot of
Yeah, we have newly set up our Facebook account, the Chengdu WorldCon, and yeah, you're welcome to share. I don't know, like to link, and oh, this postcard we just did it in 3 days, so that 14 months deadline won't scare me.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go get some dinner.
Thank you.